This is the sweet sound of success with Sue Wilhite, Profit Attraction Master. Jesse Krieger sits squarely at the intersection of publishing and promotion, having signed 2 publishing deals on 2 different continents and navigated the world of becoming a best-selling author twice. It has been his honor to work with hundreds of authors from around the world to achieve their dreams of writing and publishing a book. Thank you so much, Jesse, for being on the show. I am so thrilled to have you here. You just don't know.
Oh, thank you, Sue. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Oh, so am I, because whether you know it or not, I think I was the recipient of one of your first emails.
Do you remember what year that was?
I'm not going to confess. It was a couple of years ago, at least. Yeah. and I remember, and you have become this total superstar in the world of publishing. And so I am deeply honored that you're on my show. I think this is great.
I appreciate that. I appreciate it. Just put in the work every day, and at some point it starts to add up, I suppose.
Right. So for my viewers and listeners who are not familiar with the show and just wanted to come in and see superstar Jesse here, the way that this show works is it's based on Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. And I've taken 5 pieces out of that format, and they are the ordinary beginning, which I always laugh at with entrepreneurs because nobody has an ordinary beginning. The call to action, what drove you to being an entrepreneur, the big hairy monsters that you got to play with during the process, and a couple of sections that I think are really important for entrepreneurs and potential entrepreneurs to know about. And it's the allies, sidekicks, mentors, guides, Gandalf's, Dumbledore's, Ron's, Hermione's, whatever you want to call them, the folks that help the entrepreneur out and lead them on their way. It is so ignored, I think, in the entrepreneurial world. We talk about solopreneurs and all of that. I just think guidance is such an important thing. And finally, what Joseph Campbell calls the return home, that once the hero has been out adventuring and playing with the big hairy monsters and, finding the magic sword and doing all the wonderful things, then they go home and people in the village haven't done those things. And I've always maintained that the first time you get paid any amount of money, whether it's a quarter or $1 or $50,000, the first time that happens, it changes you intrinsically and you become different. And how do the people in your world react to that difference? And I've had some really fun answers on this show for that. So that's one of the pieces that I always look forward to. So, Jesse, what was your ordinary beginning?
In some ways it was ordinary. And depending on who you are and where you grew up, maybe not so much. But I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, in a suburb just north of San Francisco, in a single-story house, with a nice little backyard and a park down the street, walking distance or biking distance to all the schools I went to growing up through high school. And it was kind of idyllic in the earlier stages. It's a nice place to live. I have a supportive family. So there wasn't any like huge, crazy beginning, so to speak, compared to someone that may have like escaped from a war zone or grew up abandoned or something like that. I did have a kind of idyllic, ordinary beginning, as it were.
Cool. We'll be sure to mark the podcast, The Ordinary Beginning.
Yeah, maybe until I was like 13 or 14. And then, I got introduced to music. I got a guitar, a
Mhm.
Fender Strat,
Oh,
fell in
nice.
love with Jimi Hendrix, fell out of love with school, started doing music full time. And essentially, that, if there was the call to adventure, it was, I knew from an early age that I wanted to be a lead guitarist in a rock band. And that was my clarion call for many years, which I pursued with vigor and passion, as it were.
Yeah.
Took me to LA, Los Angeles Music
Yeah.
Academy. I lived in Europe
Wow.
for a year as a street musician and playing in bars and clubs with another American guy at 19, 20 years old.
Wow.
Moved from there to Nashville, Tennessee, and learned music production. And ultimately, my entree to entrepreneurship was meeting my bandmate, who became my first business partner, and starting a record label for our own band.
Oh my
So
goodness. So
my
you must have skin like an elephant or a rhinoceros because doing all of those things, you had to face rejection. You got to go through, well, that didn't work. I always imagine street musicians standing out in the rain.
You don't really want to do that. There's
You don't
nothing
really want to
glorious
do that,
about
but
getting
that's,
rained on.
right.
But
But
what I will say to that is, like, my father has always been very encouraging. One of my earliest memories of him is like, turn off the TV and go out, like hang out with your friends, have an
I know.
adventure, explore. Just don't sit on your butt and do nothing. So I was always prompted to go out into the world. And a trait that's always kind of come second nature is I just raise my hand to go first. I speak up. I kind of just go for it without getting too wrapped up in the internal dialogue of if I, should I, can I. I'm just like, if I get traction and I get some result, then I can talk about what I did. And that's the orientation I've kind of run with for a while.
Nice. Nice. So it's not can I or should I, it's do I. What do I do?
Ayn Rand said very eloquently, the question isn't who's going to let me, it's who's going to stop me.
Right. Right.
And by putting my attention to look at who could potentially stop me pursuing my dreams and having a strategy to navigate that is at least a more productive question than asking, who am I to go after the things I really want in life? Which, I'm not belittling anybody that's asked that question. We all do in some shape or form, but I've just always kind of gone for it and then see where the chips fall and then decide what my next move is, for better or worse, I'd say.
For better, I think. But
More times than not, I guess.
right. Yeah. Well, the averages are with you, you know, if you go for it and it's something that you're really drawn to. And this is what I see a lot. And even I think Joseph Campbell talked about it and Steve Jobs talked about it, that those things where your heart is pulling you to something, maybe it doesn't work out the way you thought it would, but it's a stepping stone moment that gets you where you needed to be to do the next thing.
That's right. Yeah,
Right.
Steve Jobs put that beautifully, saying you can connect the dots looking backwards.
Right.
In other words, looking back on life and looking back on my life, I can identify the key highlights and the pivotal moments that in the moment I wasn't, sometimes I was, but I wasn't always thinking this is a pivotal moment in my life.
Right.
Um, but in hindsight, those things become clear. And that's kind of the beautiful thing with age and perspective. Whereas, back in our story at 20, 21 years old, starting a record label, being in a band, I wasn't as introspective or reflective. I felt like I had to make it happen.
Mhm.
And I felt perhaps a lot of pressure, much of which I put on myself, but some of which was certainly external pressure as well, to have gone that direction instead of a more traditional path of college and career planning. I felt like I had to prove something. And if we fast forward to today, I've really tried to unwind that one to, it's not about me proving anything anymore, or
Right.
much less than it used to be, I hope, and more about exemplifying, excellence instead of trying to prove to someone I know what I'm talking about, or edging my way into certain situations as I was apt to do earlier in life. If that
Right.
makes sense.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's that it's partly the imposter syndrome, but it's that it is a big hairy monster of, oh, I got to prove it. I've got to prove to them that I can do this. I've certainly been guilty of that.
Well, the thing I've learned that is perhaps a benefit to everybody listening is, if you start to check off some accomplishments or start to attain some credibility indicators, it does change the equation in your favor.
Right.
There's a dialogue of like, oh, I'm not as accomplished as someone else, I'm not as experienced as someone else, et cetera, et cetera. But if you do write your book and get it out, or you do start a business and make your first sale, that's those are the steps in the right direction of making it real. And at the point where it's real, and no one can tell you otherwise.
Right.
And this has been a through line in my own call to adventure, and answering it in different ways has been establishing something that didn't exist before, and then looking at it and celebrating the creation, whether that's a business, a band, working on a song and then hearing it on the radio. At that point, it's not an internal dialogue of, am I good enough to write a song? You're like, look, my song's on the radio and
Right.
everyone else can hear it too.
Right.
And what do you think? So
Yeah.
that's the other side of the coin from the questioning and the insecurity on the earlier side.
Yeah. So the recommendation would be, don't sit around and question, do it, and then ask, hey, look at this.
I would
Come
say,
check
to
it out.
the extent possible, if you have an idea, and this is what I actually wrote about in my book, Lifestyle Entrepreneur, as well, but if you can take it past an initial threshold where it exists and somebody else can see it and experience it, that's a great starting point. So like, if it's a book, write an introduction or write a book description like you'd see on Amazon and be like, hey, does this sound like an interesting book? That's far more valuable than saying, hey, I've been thinking of writing a book for 5 years. Do you think I should? Yes, no, maybe. Who cares? But if you're like, here's a chapter, do you like the writing style? Is this character interesting? Do you want to read more? And then you can get actual feedback. And that's the incremental process of creating something new, like a book or a business or an online brand or a podcast or a show.
And there are so many writers and so many resources these days, just in terms of creativity. I'm not as familiar with the music industry, but I do know that for writers, there's platforms like Scribd that people put out chapters all the time, and other people critique them, and some people have become famous doing that.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So,
yeah. I mean, more than ever before in the age we live in, there's more community, there's more targeted support, there are more resources for any interest, any pursuit, which is kind of amazing. It can be overwhelming, but it's very different than like when I was in a band. This is 2003, 2004, and 5. It was groundbreaking to have a BlackBerry. And I was like, wow, I can type out an email in the back of the van while we're on tour. Like, this is groundbreaking. Now you can like be like, hey Siri, tell me the history of the world, and just like listen. So there's beautiful benefits to progress, and yet the process of creating something new, of going on this hero's adventure of entrepreneurship or authorship, it's the same. It's the same experience with a different flavor and more tools to help make it happen.
right. Although, these days there are more tools for whatever flavor of creative endeavor you want to do, whether it's, painting, macrame, um, entrepreneurship. I mean, goodness, the number of interesting ways to make money that are available today that are legal. Never mind illegal.
The interesting ones that are legal. No,
Interesting ones that are legal. Just fascinating.
Well,
Things
what's
that people
interesting
have come
from a
up with.
publishing perspective is topical books, very specific books. Like we publish a number of health and wellness titles, and the books that have a condition in the title, like the Concussion Repair Manual,
Right.
the Menopause Reset, doing great right now, Outsmart Endometriosis, TMJ is ruining my life.
Right.
When somebody hears that, if they or someone they know has been experiencing that, it's a natural fit.
Right.
And it's interesting, and perhaps there's some takeaways that, like, speaking to a specific audience, speaking to a specific need gets you a lot more traction than everything for everybody approach. Here's a
Right.
book on how to be healthy.
Right.
That's very
Right.
different than, like, I have a brain injury. How do I recover and get back to normal? Which
Right.
is very specific.
Right. Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
and so
I used to know somebody who just did Corvette hubcaps. That was
yeah,
all he did. Corvette
totally.
hubcaps. If your hubcap got, messed up against the curb, he fixed it for you. There's a niche.
Yep.
So,
Well,
so
speaking, we were talking about Steve Jobs. He also pointed
yes,
out that anything man-made in the world started first as an idea inside somebody's mind. From a
yes,
fire hydrant on the side of the street to a skyscraper to an iPhone, it first exists up here. And
yes.
then through that energy, effort, and intention, becomes something that other people can see and experience. And for me, that's always been the most fascinating part of life. We could call that entrepreneurship, and it is. But it's also just learning new languages, cultures, experiencing different parts of life in a really rich way. That's kind of always been what I've been about, and it's taken me on some wild adventures.
Oh, I bet. I have frequently told entrepreneurs that if they're really good entrepreneurs, they're delusional because it's a delusion. The idea that they've got in their head, they're delusional. They've got this imaginary thing going on in their head until they bring it out and make it real. Then it's not a delusion, and they need to get out of their heads and make it real.
Yeah,
That's the number one thing.
well said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what were some other big hairy monsters that you got to play with?
Well, um, I've always had a high risk tolerance.
Hmm.
Like when I
Oh,
think
yes.
about the situations I've been in now, looking back, wandering around back streets somewhere in China, um, walking around ruins after hours in South America, being in Siberia in the middle of winter and -20 with a bunch of Russians out in the frozen tundra countryside. I'm just like, if there wasn't a good reason for me to be alive and a purpose to it all, there was plenty of chances to do something incredibly stupid. But at the same time, you mentioned a big hairy monster. I mean, there are monsters to be slayed along this path of hero's journey, whether it's applied to entrepreneurship or writing a book. It will summon up the darker side, the shadow side,
Hmm.
and that's just going to happen. It's across the board phenomenon. And we were talking about delusion. I think it's delusional to think that you can just create a business that's everything you want and work with clients you love, and that there won't be any real hardship or challenge in that process. So if we can normalize that a big goal brings up a big demon to slay, then I think the right orientation is, okay, here's the goal. I'm set on that. Now, where's that demon? And as soon as it starts to pop up, get to work on it, because on the other side of that unlocks the next level of growth with the goal. And we kind of, the polarity of swinging back and forth like that, I think is representative of this journey too. There's days when it feels amazing. I'm convinced that the highs I feel as an entrepreneur and when there's a big win, that's got to feel bigger than other people's highs necessarily. And the lows, when it's bad, when I'm in a pinch, maybe there's tens of thousands of dollars in the lurch, that doesn't feel great. And that feels, in fact, horrible, perhaps more so than other people with a more even keel. But I guess for me, to answer your question, like I've tried to accommodate, how do I push hard in one direction, bring up intense stuff, and then balance it out and still stay on track. And if anything, over the years, I've expanded that comfort zone, or I've expanded the amount of zone I can experience, even if it's very uncomfortable, and keep going. And if there's another way, I'm certainly open to finding out about it, but I don't see reflected in a lot of people I know an easier way without working through these sometimes major and feels like even life-threatening issues.
Right, right. Sometimes it brings up physical stuff that gets in the way because mind and body are pretty intimately connected.
Well, yeah. So what we just described, if we're resistant to that process, if I'm resistant to it, then that would be setting a big goal. And now here comes a bunch of challenges and I'm resisting the challenge. I don't want to deal with it. I pretend it's not there. I'm just saying, here's this positive thing, positive, positive, positive. That will actually manifest in,
Yes.
either subconscious sabotage or a physical issue like burnout, adrenal fatigue, something else. So it's interesting that if we can embrace that challenge that comes up, it ultimately gives us even more strength, but it can just as easily derail us in that process too.
Yes. Embrace the dark side, we must.
It's one way to say it.
So, who were your allies, guides, mentors that might have helped you through some of the dark things, or just given you advice when you were kind of scratching your head and didn't know which way to go next?
I've had sort of phases or eras of support, which I'm thankful for all of them. In the early stages in the music space, it was my dad and 7 or 8 of his clients that were either consultants, had some experience in the music industry, and or knew like finance. And he helped me form a brain trust of some of his clients. He's a CPA, so he works with a lot of small business owners, that sort of guided me on like creating a business plan, how to raise money, how to do projections of like costs and revenue and all that. So whereas I didn't learn any of that in school, I sort of assembled a brain trust that put me through the paces that ultimately was directed towards building this record label, raising some money, and how to hire and manage a team. And so there was, I don't know if anyone would know the names, but Michael Doyle, Paul Falke, there were some great people that supported me early on with their guidance and support without really expecting or even wanting anything for it. And I always try and pay it forward now as a result. I'll go on pretty much any podcast and share almost everything I know because somebody out there might be listening to it. And that's the thing that they needed to hear, the same way I've received the things I needed to hear from those who had gone before me. And so beyond music and now into different stages or even present time, like, sure, I'm the founder and publisher of Lifestyle Entrepreneurs Press, but I have a team that helps. I've got 3 business partners that own 1% of the company. but aren't operationally involved, that I can talk high level stuff with. And then I've got masterminds or just groups of other entrepreneurs where we get together and discuss what's working, what's not, and support each other. So there's these concentric circles of support that I think is always important to have. And if you're ever struggling or feel like you're cornered or you don't know what move to do next, you got to look at where you're getting support, because it's usually a symptom of just trying to figure it all out in isolation. And that can work sometimes, but if it doesn't, think about where are you getting support and are you allowing and inviting support in?
Right. I always think of that, my favorite Aniston commercial from the late 50s, early 60s, where the woman is cooking and her mother makes some kind of suggestion about it. And, Mother, I can do it myself. and that is totally the wrong way to go as an entrepreneur. No, it doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, truth be told, like one of the easiest tells for me now is if I'm talking to an entrepreneur, or giving someone advice, or someone introduced me, or if I come across someone, and if I get the sense that they're trying to convince me that their idea is right and they know everything that they're doing, people that do have experience can smell that so easily. So it's like, I get it. I guess I used to do that too, being the loud mouth, just yapping away, but you're always better served to like listen twice as much as you speak. And somebody wise, I'm sure, said that's why we have twice as many ears as we do mouth.
Exactly.
And if you just can soak up knowledge or listen to other people's perspective, I'm always curious, and I get curious about what people that are getting results, what people that are successful, what are their daily habits? How do they just interact with the world? And you don't get the opportunity to learn from them or to observe if I'm too busy telling them how smart I am and how I got every problem solved, right? And so when we tune in, you can see that success leaves a breadcrumb trail for you to follow. And it's everywhere. The more you look, in fact, the more that you see. So that's kind of a cool thing with all this too.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons why I bring up allies, mentors, and guides in this podcast, because so many people have it in their heads that they've got to go it alone, that they have to have all the answers. And no, there are, as we said before, just in the creative realm, there's a ton of resources. There are so many resources right now available for an entrepreneur to.
Yeah, that's true. But
at
a deeper level, if somebody feels like they have to go it alone, it's not for lack of resources. And you need to get in touch with why do you need to do this?
Right.
Whatever this is. And underneath that need can be something as simple as proving to my parents that I'm good enough, or showing somebody that crossed me that I'm successful and that they couldn't hold me down, or proving to my ex that I'm not the deadbeat she said I was. I'm just giving examples, but there is a reason why we feel we need to do things in a certain way. And if we can unpack that, there's also a amazing opportunity for growth and transformation to let go of those needs and move more in intuition and be more in flow.
Right. And I can tell you from having coached many entrepreneurs over the years, everybody you're trying to prove to pretty much isn't going to listen. They're just not. So prove it. Go get help and do it for you. and get those resources and get those allies and get those mentors that are out there. Jesse, I'm sure you've experienced this too. You were talking about it with this brain trust that you had early on in your music career, but most people at a high level are absolutely thrilled to be asked to help. And they
Well,
want to help, and they'll just like, oh, sure, you got a question? Here's how you do it. Here's this resource. Go do this. Here's the plan. And
I
they'll
think
just
that's
hand
true
it to you.
in the right context for sure.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
in other words, the most successful people, people that have started multiple businesses, people that run or have interests in multiple businesses, tend to be that way because they're just focused on moving things forward and solving problems, as opposed to really getting caught up on almost anything. And so
Right.
if you get into somebody that's in flow like that, then they could open up doors that would take a long time to open up otherwise. And that's a great strategy to align yourself with other people. But more so, like, look for who's already doing and getting results from and in the industry that you want to.
Yes.
When I was starting this publishing company, I didn't publish my own book. Morgan James Publishing published Lifestyle Entrepreneur, and David Hancock, the founder, was a kind of a publishing mentor, on and off. Not like he took me under his wing and I worked in
Right.
his office, but he was always available to answer questions about publishing, and indeed introduced us to our now distribution partner, which some people would look at that and say, oh my God, he's creating a competitor. But that's not how he's looking
Yes.
at it. That's not how I look at it. And it's not how you should look at it, because at least in our industry, there's enough books for any number of people to publish, and we can only publish so many books. So, like, instead of competition, he's like, hey, let's help me in this case get a bearing in book publishing, and maybe we'll bring some new innovation and great books to market. And that mindset encourages me to be innovative and to pay it forward with other people. And that's just a real representation of both how I wound up in publishing, and one of the mentors and people. Morgan James is a multi-million-dollar business with a huge footprint. They've grown since we first met, and we've grown since I first met them. And now there's new people starting publishing companies, and that's the process, right? That's the hero's journey zoomed out.
Yes. So, what has it been like for other folks in your life? The going back home portion of the hero's journey. How have other people reacted to you, both past and present, with your entrepreneurial creative journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, when I moved out at 18, I moved to LA. I went to music school. From there, I went to Europe and skipped out on my ticket home and lived in Europe for a year. That's where I was a street musician. Moved from there to Nashville and lived there 3 years, started my label, and became a rock band. And one of the coming homes was actually on tour with my band, having driven from Nashville, Tennessee to the San Francisco Bay Area and seeing some of the friends I grew up with. And yeah, so you want to talk about like a feeling of having gone on an adventure and returning back to the homeland. At that time in my life, I was in a leather jacket with straight ironed hair, playing guitar and like touring in a van. And here's my friends from just 4 or 5 short years ago graduating high school, and we were much more similar then. So those things are really cool. Those are markers on the journey. Whereas like there's been other coming homes since then after I had pursued something else. I've lived in China and studied Chinese and done other international jaunts, and returning home from any of those is like you get to see that home with new eyes. And it
Mm-hmm.
always just kind of amuses me to see the places I grew up and where I spent time as like a 5, 6 year old kid, and then just pinch myself and be like, oh well, now I'm 39 and it's the same place, and it's a lifetime of experience in between. But those things are cool to give perspective, because if we're always just go, go, go and don't get that dash of perspective from those who knew us back when or growing up or whatnot, it adds a layer of meaning, I guess, to the whole journey.
Oh, it does. And I like to think that it gives you not just a perspective, but an appreciation of all of it. Not just there's no place like home, but appreciating what was in China, appreciating, you talked about being in, I think, South America, even appreciating, Nashville and the various places that you've toured. There's something about all of them to sort of bring into the mix. And you can appreciate home, but you can also appreciate, China, Siberia in the winter. What was it, -12?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's well said. I mean, that's a great way to advocate for traveling because, if you just think of it this way, if the world is a book and every country is its own page, then you've got, according to the UN, a 193-page book. And if you never leave the country you were born in, you're kind of reading the same page over and over again. But when you go and travel and see other places and get some experience, it always sheds a new light on the place that we've called home. And that's been a always fascinating part of my life.
Right.
Just to realize, I've used to say often, the world is both a playground and a potential addressable market.
Yes.
That's less true now with travel restrictions, but that again will change as well. But there's a whole world out there to explore. And there's people on different timelines that you could easily build a business in another part of the world if you feel called to do that. There's nothing stopping you other than your own creativity.
Right. Right. And to a certain extent, the lack of travel has enabled people to connect better. I think that's been my experience. Yes, there's some other people's experience, and I'm well aware of mental illness and depression and things like that. But the number of people that I've met from all over the world in this past year has been amazing. And the connections that have been possible that I would never have come across. So,
yeah, that's for sure.
The opportunities are there. You just need to reach out, make the connection, either in person or virtually, and then follow it up in person when we can.
Yeah.
So I have one bonus question for you, Jesse, that I love to ask. What is the favorite thing of all of the things that you do as an entrepreneur, as an artist, as a publisher? What is the favorite thing that you do?
Like ever or currently?
Currently.
For me, it's having the in-depth call with the author on their, just, I call it the publishing conversation, but in one big hour-long talk, we can dive into the book, help them get clear on the structure of the book, help them get clear on the stories that they'll share in the book and what impact that'll make, help them get clear on how the book can position them for the next 1 to 3 years of their career. And I got to say, I built a business around this, but at the heart of it is getting in kind of the trenches with authors with their ideas and bringing my accumulated experience to help orient them in a direction that's to their benefit, right? To help skip out on months or years of painful learning experiences or expensive mistakes and stuff, to just align and really give the support that authors want, but also what they need, that I know they need, that they may not be thinking about. And
Right.
so just that part of what I do is the most enjoyable. I kind of think of everything else I do just allows me to have that kind of experience, which is important. And just from a business structural standpoint, right? It makes the other things I would be less excited about some parts of running a business if I wasn't super passionate about what I just said.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Jesse. So how would people get a hold of you if they wanted to get your books, have that in-depth author conversation with you, or just get in touch with you?
Sure. I'm pretty easy to find. LifestyleEntrepreneursPress.com. Maybe we can link that up. We're the publisher for The Passionate. So if that's you, we should connect. Jesse Krieger. You could find maybe 100 interviews and podcasts I've done on entrepreneurship for authors. And connect with me on Instagram at LEPressBooks. And find me on Clubhouse at Book Publisher.
Right. Yes, there's now Clubhouse we get to mention. Another resource.
Great one, actually.
Yes. So thank you so much for your time, Jesse. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the experience, the wisdom, the knowledge that you have brought to my viewers and listeners. And I appreciate what you've done so much.
Thank you, Sue.
And thank you to my listeners and viewers on the sweet sound of success. What are your dreams for your business? You know what drives me crazy? Really smart business owners denying their talents because they've been taught it has to be hard, because they've been taught that they don't deserve their gifts, that they're not worth anything. They've been taught that their gender means they can't express their genius. I'm Sue Wilhite, and I want you to have access to your genius. I want you to go out and rock the world with your genius. So I created the Call to Action Coaching Program. It's all about getting to the heart of you and what you've got to share with the world to make a profitable business that thrives and allows you to make a difference in the world. Click the link to sign up for the Call to Action Coaching Program today. Don't let your genius go unnoticed.